so to speak. They're doing a great job.
Follow up.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll move to Director Smith.
Thank you. I've heard really good things. People from my community have said that they've walked in thinking that they were going to be, given an appointment a long way down the road, and that they haven't, and that the staff has been very helpful and given them a lot of information so that they can start thinking about a project. One of the things I noticed that's not in your report is to do with the parks and trails. So when we had items that then get referred out to the parks commissions, how does that fit into all of this?
Through the chair. So that item isn't included in the report because the focus really was on development services. Recognizing that it's a valid question because that's obviously part of a subdivision, usually a subdivision or rezoning process. Certainly if we were to conduct a service review, we would be drilling down into various business processes that could sort of get into the nuts and bolts of how that works and how that could be more efficient if it's not already.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. I am really pleased with your recommendation to do a service delivery review. I think that would be really helpful and provide a lot more comfort if we're going to be investing in new technology and all the rest of it. I am wondering about the recommendation about I get that it would be probably useful to do a bit more work on the delegation of authority and advisory planning commission referrals. I happen to think one of our areas that is a problem are the APC, is the support that we provide to the APCs to make them as effective as they could be. I really value my APC, and we have had a great opportunity of doing an OCP review and using applications that come forward as sort of a way into looking at the policies in the OCP. So that has been super helpful. And the discussions, even if they've gone a little bit broader than what probably the advice that you're looking for, it's been a really good learning experience for everyone. So I just feel that APCs don't get the support that they need in terms of always having staff people there to advise them, and I think that should be part of this service delivery review. So I'm just wondering that, and the issue of delegation of authority, that would be part of the service delivery review. So is that second recommendation maybe premature, or?
Through the chair, I think that's a really good question, and I sort of contemplated that myself when I was preparing this report. But I do think that I think this bylaw needs to be reviewed, and I think that it needs to be updated. I see some deficiencies in it, so I think that, and then that's why I made the recommendation that I did. But I think that also the input that's gathered through the service delivery review, if that happens as well, would obviously contribute to potential amendments going forward.
Director Kuhn, or did you have a follow-up, Director Nicholson? Okay. Director Kuhn.
Do we have any idea how much that consultant is going to cost us?
Ms. Cheroff.
Through the chair, the cost would be roughly $30,000. There is money within the community planning function to support that work in this fiscal year.
Director Nicholson.
Another point that I'd like to make about this whole issue is that I think that we're really suffering on the community planning front, and I think that we've pulled resources off the harmonization, modernization project, and I think that's going to come back to haunt us if we don't get people moved back into working to helping Coralie, because there is an awful lot of work that needs to be done in a timely way if we're actually going to improve a lot of these things. So, and I know you know that, but I think that I guess my question is, when do we think we can start to move some of those staff back to their regular positions?
So through the chair, I agree with the statement. Certainly, resources have been pulled over from community planning into development services. And on the community planning side, we're really short-staffed and are also relying heavily on consultants, which isn't necessarily good in the long term. And it's also taken staff resources away from being able to do general day-to-day community planning work, which is also really important, notwithstanding the other big project, obviously, that we've got going with harmonization. So we are in the process of recruiting for a manager of development services currently, and I would expect that position to be filled before the end of the year. With that individual then in place, I would see us as being ready to start redistributing and also, pending a service delivery review, if that's approved, we would get a better understanding of where we need staff and how we need to allocate those resources.
Okay, what is the committee's pleasure? Director Nicholson?
I'll move the recommendation.
It's been moved, it's been seconded. I'm going to call the question. We did read it out already. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to new business 1, and that is Director Smith. Director Morrison.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I'm going to renew my objection to this being appropriate for consideration. I know that we've adopted it and included it in the agenda. This is an item that we had a special meeting about. And my point is that the discussions that were held are encompassed in a lot of the accompanying documentation. And I believe this, because we've made a recommendation to the board, I remember one of the directors saying that the item that's being suggested here is a good idea, but to not hold up the decisions that we made in year 1 of the funding program. I believe that this is an attempt to undo or to change the course of a recommendation that was duly voted on and approved and should be debated at the board. And I think it's out of order to be debated here at committee.
I turn to the corporate secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of information. I've been informed that the information held within the director's report is a broader base than what was previously discussed. So I believe this to be a new business item.
Director Morrison.
Further to my point, that exact point, the discussion of developing new criteria, I believe it was Director Wilson, made mention during the debate at the special meeting that we should develop those new criteria for identifying the priorities, but these projects in year 1 of the 5-year program shouldn't be held back. That's why that recommendation and that debate was held at the special meeting. I believe this discussion should be taking place at the board meeting because this has already been put on the floor, discussed, debated, and it should go to the board.
I'm listening to the corporate secretary, and I'm going to move that this be put on the floor. Director Smith.
I'd like to continue with the new business, the recommendation that it be recommended to the board that the CVRD staff prepare a report on a broad-based strategy plan for the funding allocation of the Community Works Funds 3.0 asset management infrastructure investment total of $3 million prior to a new asset management infrastructure project summary, funding summary.
So are you moving that? Are you gonna?
I'm moving
You're
that.
moving it, and if there's a seconder, you'd like to speak to it, and then I'll go to Director Acton. Is there a seconder? There's a seconder. Director Acton? Yeah, you can speak to it, just a second.
This is not how good governance happens. We're talking about $3 million now, and I just received an email on it as I was walking through the door and a piece of paper here. So this is, and
Mr. Keeper?
And it's very clear what is trying, it's trying to defeat a decision that we already made as a committee to go to the board.
Mr. Keeber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was basically going to say the same thing that Director Atkins just said. This is not best practice, what you're doing here. You're sticking an agenda at the last minute. I didn't receive it till 30 seconds ago. I'm not sure what other staff have received it, but it talks about broad-based strategy. This has been done over the last year, and the committee and subsequently the board has debated this and approved the strategy that we were using. Staff have been using that going forward, preparing the 2020 budget, and now it seems that at the last minute, with very little consultation with staff, we want to change that, and I am strongly recommending not endorsing this.
Thank you so much. Director Smith?
Thank you. I appreciate the input from the staff and other directors, but I also feel that we need to move forward with giving direction to staff to prepare a report on a broad-based strategy plan for the funding allocations. We are looking at this as a 5-year decision, and currently the decisions are being made solely on the risk assessment. We have 14 projects that were brought forward to us. They have moved to the board table for next week, but we still need to look at what we should be doing to ensure that our decisions are not based on there needs to be more criteria involved in our decision making. Right now we have utilities that have come forward and made local decisions to increase their taxation, their parcel taxation, and their user fees to make sure that they're working towards their improvement of their utility assets. Other utilities have not stepped forward and made local decisions to work on their assets and have now placed themselves in a high-risk category on the list of 14. So we need to come up with we need to ask the staff and give the staff direction to look at a strategy plan for us allocating these funds in a decision that's not based on just risk assessment. I believe that this is a good way forward for us we are looking at $3 million over 5 years, and the decisions that we make impact the financial lives of taxpayers within our communities, and we all need to be very respectful of whether we're creating issues that could be economic disparity amongst our communities and our taxpayers. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to ask staff to prepare a report. The motion that was made on the 8th of October is still going to the board next week. This does not change that. What this does is it gives staff direction to look at a broader based strategic plan for allocations of these funds.
Director Nicholson?
Thank you. I found our discussion, the way it ended at the special EASC committee meeting about this topic, I found it, I was not satisfied at the end of it. There was some good points raised about the ANOVA report recommendations, and the fact that the Community Works Funds is one of our big opportunities to address infrastructure issues that we have in a more strategic, broad-based kind of format. I think it is really important to do this stepping back, address the concerns that were raised, and not necessarily lock up the next, the number 3 phase Community Works Funds just based on risk. I think that there are other things that we should be probably considering. We may end up back at that place, but I really think we need to go back to the ANOVA report and have, and build a strategy around how we go about doing this if we're using community works funds for water and sewer infrastructure. I mean, I think this is really important to do. And I wasn't happy with that last meeting because there was only the one option. There was no other ability for us to work through to get to this point. And I think this is probably where we should have got to at that meeting. And so I very much would support this recommendation.
Thank you. I turn to Director Morrison, Acton, Wilson, and Kuhn. So I have a little bit of a speakers list. Director Morrison.
So unless my recollection fails, this is exactly the same discussion we were having at the special meeting. That we have this set of criteria that staff have been working towards. Some of the directors found that there should be a better way forward. I'm saddened that we've got directors making statements like this program is locked in for the next 5 years. Because we all know we adjust our budgets every year, we approve our spending every year. It was discussed at the last meeting that we can move forward with year one. I think it makes perfect sense to bring the other criteria in for another discussion post this budget and post the plan to spend on the projects that have been identified by our staff. And that's the basis that we move forward. I fully expected a resolution to come forward at the board of this nature once the approval of the recommendation that came from the special meeting happened. And then this is a subsequent meeting because this is not a quick analysis that's going to be done to develop a whole new set of criteria. That's why I suggested that this belongs at the board. We can absolutely move this forward, but it's a discussion that we've already had and is more than appropriate to come forward. I'm not going to support it here because I don't think it belongs here. We can address the resolution that came forward. We had a whole meeting for it. And then we can address this extra item, which I actually agree with the intent to develop a broader criteria, but not holding up the resolution. And I'm just going to speak quickly to best practices, because on the basis of the resolution before us, I don't know if we're talking about putting the entire 30% community works funds on hold until this report is done, or whether we're going to proceed with year one that's already been discussed at committee. So it's short notice. Staff haven't had a chance to vet it. It's not best practices, and this board has got itself into so much trouble by taking somewhat ill-conceived late items onto the agenda when this already had a destination to where it was going to be discussed. I won't be supporting the recommendation.
Director Wilson, Kuhn, and Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the reasons I seconded this motion to was that we would have this discussion that we're having right now, and I think Director Nicholson has hit the head on the nail on the head, because I too was pretty uncomfortable. There are a couple of key phrases in the report that Director Smith has brought forward. One of them becomes the current allocation becomes a reward system for those CVID utility systems that have not increased their taxation or user fees substantially to deal with their system deficiencies. And it's absolutely right. And I also agree with what Director Morrison has said. Yes, let's move forward with the first year. Let's get that done. But we need to be absolutely sure that the concerns that Director Smith has brought up, which are very, very valid, as far as the ANOVA report and the way these things are being allocated, are directly addressed and not forgotten. We can't go forward, and if it's true that we're only dealing with the first year, fine. But if we're dealing with this for the next 5 years and can't change it for 5 years, then something has to be done about that. And I would just like to ask for clarification that we're dealing with the first year only, and that Director Smith's concerns, and my concerns as well, are taken into consideration as we move forward to years 2, 3, 4, etc.
Director Kuhn?
Yeah, that was my question as well, is
Oh, did
Is-
you have a staff?
is
Sorry,
this report, what?
just a second. I'm having hands over here and I'm confused. Director Morrison?
Well, you posed the question about are we dealing with year one
Okay,
going forward, or are we approving the whole 5-year plan?
Well, that's the question,
okay.
is,
Director Smith, could you answer that question in your resolution? Is it for Director Smith?
My
The
resolution.
intent on your resolution,
My
is it for the?
intent on the resolution is to look at the whole allocation of the 3 million. That is for the 5 years.
Okay. Director Kuhn?
so that would include this year. And if that's what the intent is, yes, we're in a time squeeze. So I think that's where the major problem is. Because if it was starting next year, well, we wouldn't have to have this discussion now. We have time enough. But if you want to have this year included in that whole concept, well, yeah, we're facing a bit of a problem.
Okay, I have Mr. Kieber that would like to speak, and then I will go back to my speakers list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to refresh everybody's memory. We started this back in July when we looked at the Community Works Fund money in a whole. What this has seemed to be whittling down to is just 30%. There's also the other 60%. The Community Works Fund money is given to local governments to help with the infrastructure deficit. Well, that's what we're trying to apply it to. As a result, it's been whittled down to only 30% going towards the deficit. And now we seem to be focusing on the criteria of how that 30% is divvied up. There's also 60%. And so if we're looking at criteria, maybe is it going to go up to the entire 100% that we've already done in July and then again in August? And then apparently he had a special meeting last week when I wasn't here. So it seems to be a lot of rehashing of the same topic. And now, if that's the desire of the committee, that's fine. But the reality is, it's not likely to hit base in 2020 budget then, because due to timing, there's going to be a process to take place to do all this review. And that's fine if that's what the committee wants. But I just wanted to give you that heads up that it seems to be whittling down to the 3 million of the 10 million.
Thank you. Director Acton?
Madam Chair, this is, so we've all pointed out this is a little short notice. I have barely read this whole email. We're not clear on what the recommendation is. Staff has suggested that we do not practice this kind of poor governance. If we need to look at this, the criteria and how we set out to fund things through gas tax, then we can have that discussion, and I would like to make, does staff need just direction to bring this back after budget, or can I make an amendment to the motion that we would have this conversation again when it's appropriate time?
You're making an amendment to have a conversation at the appropriate time?
Well, to bring up this topic so that we have enough time to read the report, to understand the motion. We're not even clear about what the motion means.
Not clear
We're
on
not
the-
clear on the consequences, and we're not clear on our budget process where we've made all these decisions already up to here. And so if we have actually made some poor decisions over the last year, let's review that when it's an appropriate time. Right now, like,
Do you have an
midstream.
amendment? You have an
So-
amendment?
My amendment would be or do you want to give me a moment? You want proper wording on the amendment, or, okay,
So,
right,
hold
okay.
it. Ms.
Thank you.
Harrison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I could suggest to Director Acton that she refer the recommendation until after the budget has been adopted.
Sure, I would move that if anybody would like to second it.
There is no seconder. Oh, there is a seconder. Okay, so this is on the amendment only? On the referral. Referral, not the amendment. Director Morrison?
On propriety, I think it gets it off the plate, which isn't necessarily what we're wanting. And I was I was initially going to suggest we defeat the motion, but we have staff work with Director Smith to bring forward a resolution subsequent to the adoption of the resolution of the special meeting. I don't know how we get there from here, but I think that's what we're trying to do, is get year one underway and deal with years 2 to 5. That's what I would suggest, but referral works too.
Okay, so on the referral, I have, yes, Ms. Soldera?
The $3 million, just over $3 million project list that it will be going for approval at the board meeting perhaps, does include all of the funding for the entire 5 years. While certain dates were suggested with that project listing, the board did not particularly endorse any year for each of those projects. It was up to staff to choose the importance of those to bring forward for a given year. So should the board make a decision to only bring forward 1 year's worth of budget items, I would need to know which of those specific projects the board wishes to bring forward.
Okay.
The full listing does not lock us in for 5 years, but it is the projects that were suggested that use all of the $3 million over the 5-year term. And so, yes, those projects can be amended at a later date, but what we put forward did include the entire 5-year allocation.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have, this is on the referral, Director Smith.
As I cannot support the referral, I find that, as Ms. Soldera has stated, that it was the whole amount of money that was moved to the board, and that's a 5-year was the recommendation. So to me, the word of 1 year is not on the table. It's a 5-year, and so I can't support the
Referral.
the amendment at the moment.
On the referral, Director Nicholson, did you want to speak? No, on the referral. I'm going to call the question on the referral. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Been defeated. Going back to the main motion. And I have my speakers list, Director Haim and Director Smith and Director Acton. Do you want back on?
These monies were meant to address infrastructure deficits. When it comes to the aspect of Director Smith's concern, I think effectively what she's saying is, and my interpretation, some organizations have worked to address their deficit independently, whereas other organizations haven't with regards to their funding. At the same time, this is a bus that's moving as we go along here. If it was a motion related to years 2 to 5, I could support it. I can't support it with respect to year 1. It's too late in the game for that, good or bad or whichever. Certainly it's something we can address in the future, but trying to address it at this time for that section of it, I don't think it could be done in an appropriate time frame.
Microphones, please. Except Director Smith, you are next, and then I have Director Acton. Oh, not Director Acton, Director Smith.
Thank you very much. We're not talking about year 1, we're talking about 5 years for $3 million. And I will speak very bluntly that Saltaire in 2012 agreed as taxpayers to increase their taxation $358 per parcel. And in the past 5 years, or past 7 years, they've done $2.5 million worth of work. It was a local decision to increase the taxation. I refer everyone to the paper that I handed out, and if you'll look at your the Schedule K and Schedule L, it shows very clearly which utilities have stepped up to the plate to increase their taxation or their user fees. We are now looking at turning it into a reward system when we're looking at the Community Works Funds, 30% that is being allocated under a risk assessment only. And if we start rewarding certain utilities that have not increased their taxation or users, then we are not acting in a democratic way. We are not creating best practices for our communities. It's very important that if one area has stepped up to the plate to fund projects to make sure that their water isn't running down the roads, isn't breaking on a constant basis, we need to not be rewarding groups that have only not increased their taxation. So I think it's really important that we go back to the staff and ask them to put together a strategy where we can include the numbers and come up with a system that works for all of the utilities. And the 14 that have been listed, I think that there is definitely some funding inequities that are taking place in this group. But it is a 5-year, $3 million project, and we need to be very cautious as we move towards who we reward in this method that we're currently involved in.
I have staff that wish to chime in here, and I have Ms. Wayner. Welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a little bit of quick history to the board and remind them. Back in June, it was set as criteria that staff prioritize these 30% based on the condition and risk assessments related to major capital reinvestments. Okay, also to come up with a different kind of guidelines, there's a lot of other variables. Things like water quality comes into effect. Some areas may have better water quality, so they need less treatment. Other areas may have different financial reasons, demographics, those kind of things. So it would definitely take some time to build the criteria. With that timing would mean that the budget would be held up at this point for the 5 years, which would mean either we delay the budget or we progress without having any funds in for the Community Works Funds at this point in time.
Thank you. I turn to Director Kuhn.
Well, I have the impression that we can't really break it up like in 1 year and 2 to 5. I don't think that's possible. So I think if we want to refer this back, it's a whole package. We can't just do 1 year. So the choice is simple. It's okay, we might refer it back and then maybe it will delay the budget process. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. So that's the decision we're facing. I don't think there's any compromise possible. If we just set 1 year apart, how do we divvy that up? So we're going to be faced with the same problem again. So as far as I'm concerned, we either okay the way it is, or we refer the whole thing back and we say, okay, fine, it'll have to be more equitable, and that might take time, but I mean, hey, it's not the end of the world.
Director Nicholson, then Director Wilson.
Yeah, I think there's a way through this. I really think it's important to go back to the ANOVA report. They really emphasized, if I recall correctly, the importance of thinking about where we're going with our water and sewer systems, because the way they are existing right now, they're not sustainable. So I think that we need to think about how we can move forward on amalgamating systems and where funding maybe could be put in that direction. I think this issue of equality, size, ability to pay around each of the systems has to be brought into the it has to be factored in, because it doesn't appear to be particularly fair right now. And of course, the liability that the CVRD has and the risk is important, so that we need to deal with that. I'm wondering if we could make a motion that the staff prepare this broad-based strategy plan, and that maybe and I'm not sure if this is a 5-year thing or a 4-year thing, but maybe 20% of the $3 million be allocated to the highest risk, most liable projects for this current year. And then the remainder of the 3 million, the other 80% be available to, after we get this report, to be allocated. If that makes sense.
You kind of lost me there on that one. It was a little lengthy, so I'm not, I have, so when you get that written out, do you want to make that motion? Director Wilson, just a minute, where am I? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I deplore indecision, and I especially deplore indecision in myself. And right now, I'm caught in that trap where I totally agree with the things that Director Smith has brought forward. But having said that, there is some comfort in what Ms. Soldera brought forward as well, that some of these projects don't have to be done immediately. The board will vote on when they come forward. So in that respect, we do have some control over how this money is spent, which may give us some breathing time to bring in some of the things that Director Smith has asked for, which I fully agree with. So right now, I'm not sure which way I'm going.
Okay, Director Morrison.
So I'm going back to this, I disagree with staff that we're approving a 5-year plan. Unless something has changed in the Local Government Act, we are approving a 5-year plan and an annual budget each year. We come and we vote on this. Each of these items that's proposed to be funded in an upcoming year will have to be included in each of the budgets. I view this as direction for years 1 to 5, but we're locking in year 1. Now, if I'm wrong, can somebody correct me? I'm not wrong.
So I'm getting head shaking, you
So,
are
yes.
correct.
So we are approving 1 year of spending with this. Years 2 to 5 can be approved in a later budget date. I'm recommending we defeat this motion.
Thank you. I am moving on now to, who do I have? Oh my goodness, where did I go with my sheet? I had something else. I think it's Director Acton, then Director Smith.
Thank you.
Where did I have, here we go.
Like, let's just step back for a second and think about how ridiculous this looks. We're making a huge we're trying to adjust a huge financial decision that we've been planning for since the summer and making criteria for the staff. Staff has said, no, don't, we do not recommend this. We've been trying to move towards a budget. We try and be effective and economically and fiscally responsible. This just does not make any sense to me to make a decision like this right here today without being fully prepared, and just because one director brought it forward
I
on
have
the last
Director
minute.
Smith, and then I go to Director Nicholson for the amendment that you have written out. Director Smith.
Thank you. I think it needs to be read, the recommendation again is, it's asking for a staff prepare a report for a broad-based strategy plan for the allocation of the funds. It's asking for a report so that we can have a further understanding. It's not saying don't move forward with the money. It's not saying that. What it's saying is let's get a report so that we're making our allocations on a fair, equitable decision. We are not making decisions, we need to make sound decisions for the taxpayers. If one area is rewarded for not funding their system, I mean, the Shawnigan Lake North system and the Saltaire system are very similar in that they both have high number of parcels, but what they also have is its distribution system. We were told in 2012 that we needed $4.5 million to work on our distribution system. The community agreed to work on $4.5 million over 15 years by increasing the taxation. We didn't take out a loan, we worked on it. And so when you see items that are in this 5-year report that's the same as you, looking for funding for distribution, then you're saying, why is it that we, a utility that has worked towards funding their pipes and distribution system is not at the top of the list also for a large fund? If we still have $2 million that's required over the next 7 years or 8 years, then where are we in comparison? There seems to be a shortfall in some of the money, and I think that these things all need to be looked at by a report from the staff. And I still continue that I think it's very important that we look at a broad-based strategy plan on this.
So I'm waiting for Director Nicholson's amendment, but I have Director Haim first. Would you wait for the amendment, or you'd like to speak now? Go ahead. Director Haim.
First, just a question through you to staff. How are the parcel taxes determined? Is it set by the board?
Staff? Yes, correct, it is.
So when it comes to taking credit or lack of credit for parcel taxes that may have been inadequate in the past, it's not really about the residents, it's about the board and their willingness to impose the correct amount with regards to those parcel taxes. So in terms of going forward, and while I do respect the monies that the Saltaire system has put in with regards to their system, that was something that was decided at the board table. The shortfalls that may be occurring in other areas don't really fall to the residents, they fall to this table with regards to it. A single director does not establish the amount of the parcel tax. It is set by the people at this table. Having said that as well, completely agreeing with what Director Morrison stated with regards to the budget, we approve it year by year. It may say a 5-year plan, but that is always subject to change. And so while we do have to move ahead with regards to the current year, the future years are still open for discussion, change, adaptation, et cetera. So again, if it was something that was dealing with the years 2 to 5, I'd have no issue with it. However, with the package, including the upcoming year, unfortunately, I'd have to vote against it.
Thank you. I turn to Director Nicholson, who has an amendment written out.
Thank you. I've got an amendment written out, but it might be easier to defeat that one and just go with this motion. But what I'd like it to say is the CVRD staff prepare a report on a broad-based strategy plan for 80% of the $3,019,423 of funding allocation of this Community Works Fund 3.0 asset management infrastructure investment, and that staff budget 20% of the $3,019,423 in 2020 for highest risk projects on the table found in R1 Attachment A of Special EASC meeting October 8th, 2019.
So that,
Point of order.
yes,
Madam
Ms.
Chair.
Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is not an amendment to the one on the floor. That would be a brand-new one.
That's what I suggested at the beginning.
So we are going to call the question on what is on the floor. Director Kuhn?
Wouldn't we have to rescind the previous motion then? I mean, that opens up a whole,
The motion that is on the floor, if you have a choice, you can defeat that motion. So So there is a motion on the floor that hasn't been voted on yet, and we would go back to square one.
I'm talking about the motion that took place in the previous meeting.
That is not, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A point of clarification. The recommendation that this committee put forward at the Special Electoral Area Services Committee is going to the next board for consideration. It hasn't been ratified at this point.
Okay, I am going to call the question on the recommendation. Director Smith, you have more to add on the recommendation, the current recommendation that's on the floor?
Can I
think we've-
amend it?
Yes, you can. You need to amend it?
Well, people seem to be going towards the year 2 to 5. So if that wording was put into this, does that change it enough to move along with what?
Apparently, yes.
Yes.
So you're amending,
So I'm amending the prior one to the CVRD staff prepare a report on a broad-based strategy plan for the funding allocation of the Community Works Funds 3.0 asset management infrastructure investment for years 2 to 5.
okay, is there a seconder for that motion? There is a seconder for that motion. All righty. Okay, oh yeah, okay, Director Salmon and Director Acton on the amendment from the 2 to 5, including that in that amendment.
It sounds quite similar to Director Nicholson, so maybe just a question for staff, which is easier to work with, the 80% or the amended 2 to 5?
Well, it's the same thing.
Well, I don't know, is it?
Ms. Weiner? That's not on the floor. It's a 2 to 5 year.
If staff was to go ahead with the 20% as recommended by Director Nicholson, it's roughly about $600,000, which doesn't even cover the cost of one of the red categories on there. If we go with the recommendation for the 2 to 5, it still needs to have the projects identified for staff, which ones would be taking place and which ones haven't, because they haven't categorized it, so the board would need to do that. And staff would also need clear guidelines on the criteria, because they're so variable on what we would be doing a broadband for strategy.
Okay. Just a second, I have Director Acton and Kuhn on the 2 to 5 years on the amendment.
If there's going to be an amendment, I would like it to say broad-based equitable strategy.
We're talking about the amendment that's
Yes.
on the floor.
So,
2 to 5, it's on the floor.
yes, but in the wording, for it to say broad-based equitable strategy plan. Friendly amendment. Is broad-based not necessary?
No, we can't accept. No. So Director Kuhn. Woo, throwing the microphones around.
Falling apart here. Well, that's what I pointed out earlier. It's exactly the issue. If we only go for the one we are now, we still haven't broken it down what we want. So we still need really a report. I think that what I would like to see is this whole thing back to staff with a report coming back, okay, this is what we're proposing for this year, and then for the next 4 years,
We're just
we'll do
speaking
this.
on this amendment, the 2 to 5 years,
Yeah.
and maybe you will want to make another motion after this one is done. So
Well-
I'm gonna call the question, we're missing somebody, but I'm gonna call the question on the amendment of the 2 to 5 years. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Okay, on the main motion with the 2 to 5 years added. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Okay, Director Kuhn, well, we do need to have a break, so can we have a break and you can, well, come right back to you, Director Kuhn. Okay, we'll have a 5-minute break, please. We've been quite a long time here.